Hey guys, in looking at our sentence analysis and no red ink from the last couple of weeks, I'm seeing that we could use a refresher on verbal phrases. So I want to give us kind of a review of some of the things that we learned much earlier in the year. And to be fair, we would have had a lot more practice if we were still in school. So don't worry if this is sounding brand new to you. We haven't been able to talk about it in quite some time. So we're going to do some practice with it this week. So if you remember, a verbal phrase is where a word that is traditionally a verb is behaving like another part of speech. Gerunds, participles, and infinitives are the three kinds, and they each have a different way that we can identify them, and they're doing a different job in the sentence. So for example, gerunds are always behaving like nouns, and they always end in ing. So gerunds can be fairly easy to spot. If you find an ing word and it's acting like it's the subject of a sentence or it's a thing, chances are it's probably a gerund. Participles can also end in ing or a couple of other endings, en, ed, things like that, depending if it's present, past, or present tense or past tense. But they behave like adjectives, so they're talking about nouns. All right, so you have to really understand how that word is behaving in a sentence. Now, infinitives should be the easiest to identify, but sometimes it's hard to tell what job it's doing in the sentence. Infinitives will always have the word to in front of it. Now, if you remember, the word to is usually a preposition. So if the word to is before the, like to the store, or before a noun or a pronoun, to Susie or to me, it's going to be a prepositional phrase. But if the word to is before a word that you usually identify as an action, then you're talking about an infinitive. So they're fairly easy to spot. They're not quite as easy to tell what job they're doing in the sentence because they can be adjectives sometimes, or adverbs, or even nouns. So that's what we're going to be reviewing today. Hopefully you can keep this slideshow. I'll post it separately and you can use it in notes to refer back to. So gerunds are ing verbs and they're used as nouns. So here's an example of a gerund being used as the subject of the sentence. Now in each of these examples, the very first one is not, so this is not a gerund. This is just a noun being used as the subject of the sentence. Baseball is my favorite sport. Down here, you've got a gerund acting as the subject. Jogging. Jogging is normally an action, but in this case, it's a thing. Or you could have an entire gerund phrase behaving like the subject, like in this last sentence. Sometimes gerunds are direct objects. So I thoroughly enjoy. What did you enjoy? Baseball. Well, that's just a normal direct object. It's a noun. Look at the second sentence, though. I thoroughly enjoy jogging. Again, sounds like a verb, but it's a thing that you enjoy. So it's the direct object. It's receiving the action of the verb. Okay. In the second set of examples, the contractor was given. What were they given? A project. That's just a normal direct object. But in the second sentence, it's a gerund. The contractor was given. What were they given? A building. So again, gerunds can be direct objects in a sentence as well, still being a noun. Sometimes they can be the subject complement. If you remember, subject complements do the same kind of job as direct objects, but they're coming after a linking verb. So in the first sentence, normal subject complement. My favorite food is, what is it? Yogurt. Second sentence, my favorite exercise is, what is it? Jogging. So again, you're taking that ing word, turning it into a thing instead of an action. And in this case, it's receiving, it's who or what that linking verb is talking about. So that is the subject complement. Sometimes it's at the end of a prepositional phrase. So for example, let's just skip to the second sentence. Joe takes pleasure in running. So remember, when we talked about direct objects, we said that we're not going to be identifying direct objects if they're in a prepositional phrase. So this is just a prepositional phrase in running, or in the last sentence, in running 3 miles each day. Those are prepositional phrases, and the gerund is receiving it's the object of the preposition. It's who or what the preposition is pointing to. Or we've talked about appositives. Remember, that's another kind of phrase. That's a phrase that's interrupting a sentence by giving additional information, and it almost always has a comma on either side of it. The only time it won't is if it's the beginning or the end of a sentence, which it can take those positions as well. So my favorite sport, comma, running, comma, takes a great deal of effort. So sport and running are synonyms. They mean the same thing. They're talking about the same thing. It's not a sport and running. It's the sport is running. So it's an appositive. In this case, that's a gerund. All right, so be careful though, because sometimes if you're looking at an ing word and you've got gerunds on the brain, you might mistake what's really part of a verb in as a gerund. So if you take a look at the smaller box up in the left, my hobby is, what is it? It's cooking. So that's a subject complement gerund. Okay, but now if you take a look at the second, my husband is cooking shish kebabs for us tonight, that is part of the verb. Okay, why is this not a gerund, but the first one is? Well, because is the only part of the verb, and then we have what is it? But in this case, is cooking, and then we have an additional answer. What are they cooking? Shish kebabs. So you have to pay attention to, is it just part of a verb? Does it have a helper? Like a scrawny dog was scratching at the door. If it just said a scrawny dog was scratching, then it could be gerund. Okay, so when you're done watching this, I have put some questions in for you to do as practice. So this is the first one, and we're going to do it as a pair deck. And so you're going to identify the gerunds with G's and the verb with V's for this one. For this one, you're going to underline any gerund in this paragraph. And not every ing word is going to be a gerund, so you have to pay attention to the differences. All right? Okay, let's go on to our next kind. Oops. So the next kind of verbal phrase are participles. Participles will use ing, en, or ed as adjectives. Okay, so sometimes they're really easy to identify. The boiling water. What kind of water? Boiling water. So that's a participle. The water, which water? Boiling on the stove is hot. Now, you'll notice that this participial phrase has a prepositional phrase inside of it. I know, complicated. But if it can answer which water, it's describing the water, so therefore it is a participle. Here are some other examples with ed or en examples. So the cracked windows or the broken window. I have a hard time with the last one, the irregular endings, and I don't know how much of this you'll see in the practice that will be given, but just be aware of it. Lost can be a verb, and right now it's being used to describe the coin. So even though we've said ing, en, or ed, there are going to be those outliers, those rule breakers. Here they're showing it as an entire phrase. The windows cracked by vandals. It answers the question, which windows? Now you might ask yourself, why isn't that the verb? Why isn't cracked the verb? Because if you take that out, you can see have been fixed. That's the action. The windows cracked by vandals. Which windows? The ones that were cracked. What happened to the windows? They have been fixed. Okay? So if you see a verb and then a preposition and then a noun and then another verb, chances are you've mislabeled a participle. Chances are you have had a participial phrase and you thought it was just another verb. So you need to kind of look at the whole sentence, take it out, see if the sentence makes sense. That isn't always true. Participles can't always be removed and have the sentence still make sense. However, you need to see if you can have a flow a little bit without it there, meaning have been fixed as the verb instead of cracked. So in this one, you're going to identify the participle in each sentence, and you need to be careful because not every ing, en, ed word is going to be a participle. And then here, now that we've talked about both gerunds and participles, I'm going to want you to tell me which one is which. So you're going to have to think about how is getting the most votes being used in this sentence. Yes, it's an ing, so it could be a gerund, but is it behaving like a noun? So you need to ask yourself that, and you're going to identify each of the underlined phrases as either a G for gerund or a P for participle. All right, on to the last ones, infinitives. And like I said, infinitives are the easiest to find of the three. However, not as easy to tell what it's doing in a sentence. It will always have the word to in front of it, and the word following to is going to be a word that's often an action. That's how you'll tell it's an infinitive. Then you just need to figure out what part of speech it's behaving as. So on the top line of a 4-level analysis, instead of saying preposition verb, you're going to identify it as an adjective or an adverb or a noun. So in this case, this is an adjective, and they give us a little rule to help us. It says an adjective infinitive, and I have no idea how to say that word. That's a weird word. Adjectival infinitive always follows the noun it describes. It's not going to be at the beginning. It's not going to be before. So this is the best time. What time? The best time to do what? To start. So that shows us, okay, if you've got to start or to run or to whatever, and it's after a noun, it could be acting as an adjective. Here is another one, as a whole phrase to build the Panama Canal, describing attempt. Again, coming after the noun it's describing. Here you've got an adverbial infinitive, and here they're saying that a lot of times it's going to come at the beginning of a sentence. To win, you need the highest number of points. To win is describing the need. What do you need to win? Why are we nailing things to the plywood? We were doing it to prepare for the storm. So it answers what, it answers why, things like that. And then they just give you a little note about commas, whether you have to separate it with a comma or not. Okay, here's another example of adverbial phrases in different locations in order to win. So here's a test you can do. If you can put the words in order before the to run, to win, to swim, and it makes sense, then it's behaving like an adverb. So in order to win, you need the highest number of points. Or we nailed plywood to the store windows in order to prepare for the storm. That's a good test to see if it's behaving like an adverb or not. Nominal infinitives, that's just a fancy way of saying they're acting like a noun. To climb Mount Everest was my greatest ambition. It's being used as the subject of the sentence here. My greatest ambition, comma, to climb Mount Everest, comma, has directed my whole life. A positive. So it's being used, same phrase, being used in two different ways, but in both cases, it's a noun. Okay. And again, we're going to do some practice with infinitives. You'll have to see whether some of these are infinitives or if they're just a prepositional phrase. Only identify the infinitives here. And then in the last one, I want you to tell me whether the infinitive is being used as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb.